Sridhar, you're live.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to City Parks and Community Services Commission meeting of September 23rd, 2020. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Item number 2, roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that the governor has issued 2 executive orders relaxing the requirements pertaining to remote meetings under the Brown Act. The procedures adopted for this meeting have been established to meet or exceed the standards set forth in the order. For more information, please refer to Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-29-20. I will now take roll, after which I will confirm certain matters for the record. Commissioner Dorlick. Commissioner Dorlick.
Present.
Commissioner Kensington Lee.
Present.
Commissioner Birnbaum.
Present.
Commissioner Osland.
Present.
Commissioner Roberts. Student Commissioner Ramesh.
Present.
Vice Chair Lopez Lucy.
Present.
Chair Veros.
Present.
Thank you. I have 3 questions for the committee members. If the answer to yes to all 3 questions, please say yes and raise your hand. Question number 1, can you hear me well?
Yes.
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 Question 2, have you been able to hear all previous speakers, including the roll call, clearly?
Yes.
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 Are you satisfied, based on facial or voice recognition or otherwise, that everyone here representing themselves to be a committee member is actually the person they are representing themselves to be?
Yes.
Yes.
The record should reflect that I received affirmative answers from each committee member present to all 3 questions. And finally, I would like to advise the committee that any votes taken during this meeting must be taken by roll call. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 2, public comment or written communication. At this time, those in the audience are encouraged to address the Parks and Community Services Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. Members of the public who are participating via Zoom will have the opportunity to make comments to the Parks and Community Services Commission live through the Zoom application. Comments should not exceed 3 minutes. Comments from the public under public comment may also be submitted by email to ctoman@sanramon.ca.gov. No commission action can be taken at this time. Meeting on issues raised during public comment, whether submitted by email or Zoom. Written public comment emails must be submitted to the Parks and Community Services Department prior to the commencement of the meeting. Reading of the public comment emails into the record by recording secretary will be limited in duration to 3 minutes each. Public comment is limited to the item described in the notice. Comment should not exceed 3 minutes. There will be a second opportunity for public comment following the presentation. However, each person may only speak at public comment once during this meeting. Madam Clerk, any public comment at this time?
No, we do not.
Thank you. Then we go ahead and close the public comment. Okay, item number 3, commission business. 3.1, proposed development agreement, CITYWALK master plan park credit and fee proposal recommendation. Staff recommends that the Park Commission receive the report, accept public comment, discuss and provide comments to the Planning Commission and staff. Presented by Community Development Director, Debbie Chamberlain. Debbie, please go ahead.
Christine, if you could bring up the presentation. Good evening, here members of the commission. I'm pleased to be here tonight to go over the proposed development agreement, the City Park credit and fee proposal for the CITYWALK project. Next slide, please. So just as a brief reminder, the CITYWALK master plan consists of 4,500 multifamily dwelling units with 15% affordability, a hotel, 166,000 square feet of commercial space, parking structure, shared parking, 40.35 acres of park and public spaces, and publicly accessible and privately owned, pedestrian and bicycle circulation, transit hubs, and community amenities. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview, a reminder of what the plan looks like. I know we've all seen it, but just wanted to bring it up. BR1A is in the upper right-hand corner. Across from that on Bollinger is BR3A, and then the largest where the lakes are located is Bishop Branch 2600. Next slide, please. So just the abbreviated background. As you know, we had many meetings late last year on the project with the community and with the Parks Commission and other city committees. And so on July 18th, Sunset did file their application for the CITYWALK Master Plan in 2019. On June 16th, the Planning Commission held the first public hearing on the draft EIR on the project, and then held a second hearing on July 21st. And then on August 4th, the commission approved the project and certified the environmental impact report. We did receive an appeal on the project on August 14th, and on September 8th, the City Council held the public hearing denying the appeal and upholding the commission's decision. Next slide, please. So a development agreement is contractual obligation between a city and a developer. California state law allows for cities to enter into these development agreements. It eliminates the lack of certainty in the approvals of the development project. DAs provide the assurance to applicants that upon approval, the project may proceed in accordance with the rules, regulations, and policies in place at the time of that approval. Development agreements lock in city impact fees for the term of that agreement. This agreement is proposed to be 25 years. As I mentioned, it is a contractual obligation. And in exchange for entering into development agreements, cities can negotiate additional community-wide benefit, which is what we'll be discussing part of that tonight with you. Next slide, please. In approaching the development agreement negotiations, we're guided by the City Council goals, policies in the general plan, and the Parks, Trails, Open Space, and Recreation Master Plan. The City Council's goals to prioritize housing the core began in 2017 with the development of our retail strategy that guided the City Council in preserving high-performing retail shopping centers, locating housing in the core of the city to preserve open space, the character of our existing neighborhoods, and tying to the proposed walking district. And as you can see on the screen, we've listed those priorities of the City Council's goals. Next slide, please. The other guiding that we used for negotiations to guide our discussions was the general plan, the two policies in the general plan that called for providing a variety of parks and recreational opportunities. Annabelle Lake is an example of an opportunity that we do not have. And the privately owned and maintained supports our public-private partnership with Sunset Development and relieves the city of taking on maintenance costs of park facilities. Next slide, please. And so then in working with Kathy, we focused on your newly adopted master plan, which has some really great strategies for moving the city forward. So as part of those, creating a network of connected and inviting trails. So the CITYWALK will create those connections to the neighborhood, to the proposed walking district, which will be stretching from the Marketplace Shopping Center up to Crow Canyon Road. And the CITYWALK parkways are a significant component of that. It also will provide two connections to the Iron Horse Trail, one at the beginning of the bridge and one at the end of the bridge. And Annabelle Lake will not only have the visual access as discussed in your strategies, but will also have public access. Next slide, please. To implement the strategy of developing parks on the west side, the proposed agreement requires Sunset to develop the Henry Ranch Park and the Woodlot Park. Additionally, with converting the Iron Horse Middle School to synthetic turf, they are assisting the city in meeting the increasing demand for the sports field use with their proposal. Next slide, please. So just to kind of put in perspective, CITYWALK, as I mentioned, is a multifamily project. And so multifamily projects in the city of San Ramon are only required to pay the Park and Recreation Affiliates impact fee. So that fee currently is set and is vested by this agreement, and vested by the project approvals, I should say, is $10,957 per unit for a total fee obligation of a little more than $49 million. As I mentioned, they are only required to pay fees, and no park construction is required for the project. Next slide, please. So the CITYWALK parks include 40.35 acres of park amenities, consisting of a 10.5 acres in Parkway, which is the walking district, or connected to a portion of the walking district, 22.5 acres in lakes, 2.3 acres city green for civic uses, and 5 acres spread out of 5 parks ranging in size from 0.6 to 1.5 acres. In lieu of paying the $49 million fee obligation, Sunset is requesting park acreage credit to offset their obligation. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch on a few of the parks that are within the CITYWALK master plan. As we're all familiar with the 2 lakes, like Annabelle is the lake, the blue lake to the bottom. Cecilia Lake is the red one. As I mentioned, those connections to the Iron Horse Trail will run in front of the CITYWALK Hotel, across from Fieldwork. And then the other connection will come basically be where the sports basement property is right now. So that's kind of where those connections will be made. And as I mentioned, the Parkway is a big component of the walking district, which will tie through Central Park to basically the sports basement connection over Iron Horse Trail and up to Crow Canyon Road. Next slide, please. I know we presented this to the Parks Commission last December, but just a reminder that the CITYWALK project is within a half mile of 2 parks that are over 2 acres in size. One would be the Central Park and the other would be Memorial Park. So we do have that proximity for the larger sports fields used for those residents. Next slide, please. So in going into these negotiations, we need to determine the value of the park credit. And so we relied on the City Council adopted 2017 Kaiser Marston fee study to determine the land acquisition cost average value of land sales in San Ramon, Dublin, and Pleasanton were used, and the cost to develop new facilities is based on the development cost of new existing parks within San Ramon. And as you can see on the slide, the cost to acquire and construct 1 acre of land is just shy of $1.9 million. Most of that is the land acquisition cost, as you would guess, a little over $1.5 million. And then the average park improvement cost per acre of $329,000. Next slide, please. So the project has a build out of general plan build out. There will be a need of 38.65 additional acres of parkland based on how we calculate parkland per our parkland dedication ordinance. So if the city were to construct the 38.65 acres of parkland based on the Kaiser Marston cost, it would cost us $73.3 million, whereas the CITYWALK fee obligation is approximately $49.3 million, which would leave the city with a shortfall of just $24 million for acquisition and construction of the 38 acres of parkland. Next slide, please. So over the next few slides, I'm going to be presenting the negotiated park credit and fee proposal. To determine the percentage of park credit we use, the location, utility of the parks and lakes, the general public as a guide. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Christine, go back one. I'm sorry. So the first deal points I've listed on this slide are Sunset has agreed to construct 40.35 acres of park privately owned, maintained, and fully open to the public. A park credit of 48%, which is about 19.3 acres of the 40.35 acres, using the Kaiser Marston's impact fee study to give that a value, which we'll get to. As I mentioned, the location, utility of parks and lakes was considered when discussing the percentage of credit. This equates to a value of $36.7 million roughly, which is using that Kaiser Marston $1.89 million multiplied by the $19.3 million to get to that value. Next slide, please. So the next component of the credit and the fee obligation would consist of Sunset constructing the woodlot prior to the 935th building permit, Henry Ranch Park prior to the 1900 building permit, and Iron Horse Middle School synthetic turf field replacement prior to the issuance of the 1460 building permit. And that total contribution is a little over $8.8 million. And we derived that number by taking the acreage for the woodlot and Henry Ranch and multiplying it by 329,000. And then Iron Horse Middle School synthetic turf replacement, that cost was given to us by our Public Works Department. So, and to add to this, so the total contribution of 8.8 is for construction cost only. And so the design and permits will be the responsibility of the city at that time when we proceed with construction of those parks based on the when permits are issued at that appropriate time. Next slide, please. So Sunset has also agreed to pay a little over 6.1 million park and recreation facilities impact fee. It'll be paid on a per unit basis and will be escalated for inflation every 5 years. Should the developer not elect not to construct the amphitheater, which is in Lake Annabelle, they will contribute $750,000 to the city's park development fund. The community center, which is a very small one as part of BR1A, that was proposed with the project, has been eliminated. There really wasn't a community-wide benefit to it, and they decided that it wasn't needed for their residents. So based on the park fee credit, the construction of those parks I mentioned, and their fee payment, we've valued Sunset's total park contribution at a little over $51 million, where they are exceeding their fee obligation of $49.3 million. Next slide, please. So to summarize all those wonderful numbers I just threw out at you, as you can see on the slide, we have the fee credit of $36.7 million, park construction cost of 8.8, and park and rec fee of 6.1, for a total of $51.6 million. And let's see the slides here. And the project fee obligation is the $49.3 million that you see. Next slide, please. And to show this another way, the cost to the city to build the equivalent parks is $73.3 million, less required impact fee of $49.3, leaving a shortfall to the city of $24 million. Next slide, please. And so the final part of the park credit proposal, actually not the park credit, but another component of the development agreement, is the open space fee payment. Sunset's total fee obligation is $3.3 million, and they've agreed to pay 50% prior to the issuance of the first building permit and 50% prior to the issuance of the 600th building permit, which is an average time about 5 to 7 years that we would receive that entire fee payment, rather than spread over the 27-year projected construction of the project. So the city gets a great benefit of the $3.3 million pretty much upfront, so we can work on acquiring open space and trail construction that I know is part of your parks master plan. Next slide, please. So with that, I can take any questions. If I ask you to accept public comment, discuss, and provide comments and feedback to the Planning Commission and staff. And I know Jerry Ingen from Sunset Development is on, and I believe he'd like to say a few words.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. I'm pleased to be here. I'm sorry, let me start my video. There we go. I'm pleased to be here tonight. We worked really hard with the city to come up with what we felt was a really fair and balanced approach to the overall, approach to the parks. And they're, obviously, we're spending 100% of the dollars, but only getting 48% of the credit. We'd like to have 100% of the credit, but we were trying to strike a balance of creating a great community, but also recognizing the need for a community benefit beyond just the boundaries of the master plan. And so we feel that staff really worked hard with us to come up with a fair and balanced approach that not only deals with building and making the neighborhoods great, but also building parks offsite and additional dollar contributions to the Parks Commission to really create kind of a balanced and fair approach to the overall master plan in the city. And so I'm obviously looking forward to hearing your comments and would love to have the opportunity to respond once I understand where you guys are coming from. Thank you.
Okay, we can open the public comment now.
We do not have anyone in the public comment.
Thank you, Christy. So then I'll go ahead and close the public comment. Now open the floor for our commissioners to talk. Let me see. Commissioners, please go ahead, raise your hands. Okay, Commissioner Birnbaum, please go ahead. Commissioner Birnbaum.
There, pushing the wrong button. Thank you, Chairman Barros. I first want to set some context and background before I get into the specifics of the development agreement. I support the CITYWALK project for the following reasons. It addresses our long-term housing needs and requirements. It places housing near jobs and not in existing neighborhoods. It also protects our neighborhood retail shopping centers. I also recognize that this change in zoning that the city made has given Sunset a significant business opportunity, the CITYWALK project. So where are we today? The CITYWALK project was approved by both the Planning Commission and the City Council, as Debbie stated. Based on the agreement, we will be paid $49 million in impact fees and $3.4 million in open space fees if all of the units are built. At the same time the CITYWALK project was being approved, the city completed a 10-year master plan for the parks. That master plan laid out a roadmap of projects and objectives that will meet the public's needs for the foreseeable future. That master plan has one major challenge, a funding source. That funding source is the fees from the CITYWALK project. So let's talk about what makes a successful agreement. They are agreements that are, in the end, both sides feel reasonable about. I believe what has been presented to the commission today is not that type of agreement. As I stated previously, the CITYWALK fees are the primary source of funding for the master plan projects, and without those funds, we will have to go back to the taxpayers for some form of revenue bond. So we need to keep in mind every dollar we credit Sunset, we are taking $1 away from the funding source for implementing the master plan. Now let's look at the components of the proposed agreement presented to us today and why I came to that conclusion. There are two buckets, $15 million in fees and 36.7 in credits to Sunset. If we accept this agreement, we are only receiving 30% of the $49 million that we are currently owed. Why would we do this, and what do we gain in return? Debbie has already outlined what Sunset is offering. They include sidewalks and bike paths, 2 lakes that they currently own, some pocket parks that don't meet the city standards for parks, and 1 neighborhood park that would meet the city standards. While some of you might disagree with my position, I feel that the only credits that Sunset should receive is for the construction cost of the City Green Park, as long as it's built to the standards outlined in the city definition of neighborhood parks. My reasoning behind my position is the following. Sidewalks and bike paths are required of any housing development. The 2 lakes are beautiful, but are also assets that have been paid for and used by Sunset to market their business park for years. Pocket parks located within housing units are amenities that will help Sunset sell or rent units and do not meet city standards to be considered parks. Finally, I have 2 major concerns about how this agreement values the land. Paying Sunset for land that they will continue to own doesn't seem reasonable to me. What makes it even harder to understand is the 1.5 million price tag for land that Sunset has owned for over 40 years. Let's look at the 15 million that they have identified to pay for projects. The 8.8 million funds 3 projects: Woodlot, Henry Ranch, and the Iron Horse turf fields. All of these projects have been discussed and are part of the master plan process that we identified as high priority projects. But based on the agreement, the funding of these projects will not begin for almost 10 years and only after nearly 1,000 building permits were issued. The impact that these new residents will have on the community will have already been felt long before these projects even begin. Finally, the 6.1 million facility impact fee. While this money is important to fund the master plan project, it represents a fraction of what is needed and what is already due the city. For all of these reasons, I have concluded that the development agreement presented to the commission tonight is not in the best interest of the people of San Ramon and the city. I would suggest if the city and Sunset truly want to enter into an agreement, the following components would be key: an accelerated payment schedule of the $49 million due the city. This will allow the completion of key projects before new residents impact the city. Provide Sunset with a credit for the construction costs of the City Green Park as long as it's constructed to the standards of a neighborhood park. And the acceptance of the proposed open space funding proposal that was just presented. If these elements are unacceptable to Sunset, then the city should not enter into a development agreement and should continue to collect the fees that have already been agreed to, the $49 million in park fee and $3.4 million in open space funds. Thank you.
Commissioner Julia?
Julia, please remove your mute.
Yeah.
You have to do it, right? Sorry about that. So I'm looking for the best scenario for the city of San Ramon and for our residents as it pertains to our parks and community services, given this development agreement. And I'm looking at this from more of a long-term perspective. And given that, I have a few comments and some questions. So the new CITYWALK development will ultimately build 4,500 new units over the next 27 years or so, which when I use the estimated 2.11 persons per household, it actually equates to about 9,495 new residents by the year 2047. And this is about a 10 to 11% increase to our current population. And so what that's telling me is that there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on our current parks, which puts a lot of pressure on our existing parks, especially the parks that are close to CITYWALK. What I see that Sunset is proposing new neighborhood parks. And what I'm curious about is what amenities do these neighborhood parks have? Will there be a bathroom, play structure, benches, water fountains? The definition in the general plan for a neighborhood park is at least 2 acres in size, developed primarily to serve the recreational needs of the citizens. In our Parks and Community Services Master Plan, we noted that we have a large aging in place population. And I'm curious about how these proposed parks will be meeting the needs of our aging demographic population, if they're open to all residents. I'm not sure what recreational value Lake Annabelle and Lake Cecilia have for our residents because you can't swim in them and you can't fish at them in them. And I'm not sure if there's going to be boats or what other kinds of recreational amenities there will be. And also Sunset, like Dawn said, already had these lakes. Can you really count on them as parkland since you can't get full recreational value? And how will you be making these lakes accessible to the San Ramon community at large? And what recreational activities will you be offering them? We have a place for outdoor concerts in San Ramon at Central Park already. And I don't believe we need an amphitheater that competes with this one that isn't even a mile away. Perhaps we should consider improving what we have at Central Park by adding lights for evening concerts and possibly more shade. I'm also curious, what does the city green park include? I appreciate your considering the undeveloped parks on the west side in your development proposal. And I would like San Ramon to be more proactive about the timing of building these new parks rather than reactive, and be ahead of our population increase instead of behind it. Meaning, perhaps we should consider beginning to design and construct these parks earlier rather than later. The proposal only offers to cover the construction costs. As we know, designing new parks is quite expensive, and the city will have to find funding sources. And plus, waiting until the 935th unit to be sold to begin the construction on the woodlot is probably about 3 to 4 years down the road. Sunset offers $8.8 million to cover the construction, and I don't believe that this number will hold value in about 3 to 4 years. It won't be enough. Perhaps, again, we should build these new parks now to support our west side that is deficient in parks, and to give our west side residents more park usage closer to their homes now. The $49.3 million that Debbie alluded to, the city should be receiving for park and recreation facility impact fee of the $10.9 thousand per unit for the 4,500 units, was based on a study that was completed in 2017, which is 3 years old already, and it will be 4 years old pretty soon. Costs have changed dramatically in 3 years and will continue to go up, especially after 27 years. I see this as a huge hidden financial benefit to Sunset, and I'm concerned that the city will lose money due to inflation. And that's all I have to say.
Mr. Dorick.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. A couple of things. I think we need to look at it overall from the city perspective and not just parks and community services, though that is our commitment, but looking at it from a more holistic perspective. The project from a citywide perspective is excellent. If any of you saw the recent article, I think it was on Monday, that it was published that Pleasanton had to up their RENA numbers, their regional number of housing allocation, because they were deficit in that. And the time frame that they mentioned in that was 2023 to 2035, which is somewhat coincidental with this project. This project meets about 93.75% of any proposed RENA numbers if it's anywhere equivalent to Pleasanton's numbers. So that gives the city of San Ramon a great benefit and lead on responding and actually being in conformance with state requirements for housing without, as has been mentioned, impacting existing neighborhoods, impacting open space. And I think even more importantly, looking at a patchwork of infill projects that doesn't give a cohesion or a sense to the city. So with all those things in perspective, looking at the parks and the credits, I believe the partnership with the city of San Ramon and Sunset Development has been a long and very beneficial one. And in fact, the city has, long relied on Sunset Development to provide their role of economic development director in many ways. So, and I also want to point out that we do look at the master plan for parks, but we also, when we look back at that metric kind of that pie in the sky, which has never been met. We need to also look at the fact that this proposed development that actually has been approved by both the commission, the planning commission, and the city council, it is, not just a benefit to the city, but also provides many of the principles for smart growth, equity in the community, etc. So it gives San Ramon quite a great perspective into the future. But I think we need to look at a couple of things. One, I do agree on the proposed 3 lots that were there. Let me finish my other thought, was that, we're looking at a different development here than the mythical 6.8 acres, which has never been reached. So we need to look at how that is, really fitting into this type of development rather than have a suburban mindset. And the benefit is you can maintain and retain the suburban mindset in the majority of the neighborhoods without that impact of a more urban style development, which doesn't require as much open parkland as we would look at. So I would agree that there should be an acceleration of the 3 proposed improvements and move those up well beyond the 935 to 1900 and the 1460. If you look at some measure of getting those moved up, especially the first 2, because those are 2 that have been, kind of on the agenda for quite some time. So those 2 should be moved up. The question also came up that I made a note of was the maintenance of those parks. And there should be some measure of allocation of funds toward the maintenance of those 2 parks, perhaps over a prorated time period, maybe between the time the park has been completed and the completion of the project, and then hand it over to the city from a budgetary standpoint. So those 2 areas I would certainly look at as having something to negotiate on. But as far as the lakes, as far as everything else, I think those are amenities that benefit the city. I think there are precedents for including water areas in park acreage in many cities that we looked at in other systems. And I think on the amphitheater, they've already made the concession that the amphitheater is not something that is high on their list, because they've already had a piece in there that they said they already have a number to contribute for in lieu of the amphitheater. So I think that's already been discussed and I would say tacitly concurred to. So those would be my comments. Let's move up the initiation of the parks, especially the first 2, the Woodlot and Henry Ranch. And let's take a look at some additional fees for maintenance of those parks, at least for some period of time, perhaps between the 3 to 7 year time frame. Thank you.
Commissioner Kinstonley.
Thank you. I am off mute. Good. Okay. A couple of things, some of which I'm going to be echoing things that my colleagues have said, but I feel Sunset has proven itself a valuable community partner. There's no question in my mind about that part of it. However, they are, as Commissioner Birnbaum said, they are a business, and they are bound to make a good amount of money with this project. And I think we need to keep that in mind. One of the things that concerns me, obviously, is the issue of sufficient park space for residents. We talk about access to Memorial Park and things of that nature, and hopefully, we're encouraging walkability and folks are walking to those facilities. But the reality is we do have some parking challenges with some of those facilities. And also, I'm concerned about the look and feel of these parks with CITYWALK. I know it probably will have a bit of an urban look to it, but we have worked really hard to have a consistent look and feel of our parks. And I want to make sure that perhaps these new parks are reflective of that and are not disjointed from the branding of parks that we've established. I would be very appreciative of the fact that Sunset, wants to make these parks and the lakes accessible to the public. That's a great thing. Much in the same way that Commissioner Dorlick said, I feel like, we don't have a lot of differentiation with assets in our parklands. And so I do feel that it's somewhat exciting to have, to be able to say that part of our park system includes a couple of lakes. That's a good thing. So I appreciate that as part of a unique park identity for us. The question for me is to what extent, to the extent that we place value on those parklands for park credit. I mean, not parklands, I'm sorry, the lakes for the park credits. Again, as was mentioned before, there's something that are already built, and my sense is that we're giving a little bit too much in exchange for access to those lake properties. So the other part of it that I'm very curious about is to what extent Sunset would consult with the commission regarding park and parkway design. As one of my other commissioners mentioned, you're going to have a sidewalk anyway. And I imagine a parkway would be a much broader pathway that folks would walk on, perhaps ride bikes on and so forth. But the reality is this is their private property. To what extent can we influence or will be consulted on whether we have benches there, which we know are very much in need for our senior community, shade structures, how much more enhanced would these parkway areas be? And is it worth those park credits? Is it an equal trade? We want to be, I imagine Park Sunset would consult us on the look and feel of the parks, but what guarantee do we have, as Commissioner Osland said, that they're going to have the amenities that we want our residents to enjoy? So those are issues for me. I do appreciate the idea of developing parks on the west side. We know we have a lack of parks over there, but perhaps we look at Sunset picking up those design and permitting fees to offset, the lake issue for me. The other thing is, and maybe Debbie, you can answer this for me. How long would Sunset make the parks accessible to the public? Is there an end game? Is it indefinite? I would be curious about that. And also, what would the likelihood be that they would collaborate, and this might be for Kathy, collaborate with us on programming of those areas? So if we could say, for example, and I'm sorry, Debbie, I'll let you answer in just a sec. But if, for example, we want to tout that we have a publicly accessible lake in our park system, or it's owned by Sunset, but that our public can access, can we influence programming? Can we do some kind of partnership, a joint programming effort that we advertise in our online recreation guide? Do we have any opportunities for that? Would it be purely Sunset programming those areas, or would there be the opportunity? And if that opportunity existed, how long would we have access to those areas? So I'm going to get back to Debbie. I have a few more things I want to say, but I'm curious about sort of sunsetting, or,
At this stage, the publicly accessible parks is in perpetuity. So
in perpetuity. Okay.
And I would defer to Jerry on how they would program the parks. And the parks aren't designed yet. And so as each phase of CITYWALK comes back for Planning Commission approval, if the park is part of that, then we will be going through that, looking at that park process. And Jerry, not to put words in Jerry's mouth, I do recall that Sunset has committed to working and going to the Parks Commission. You guys have just done this beautiful master plan, and there's some really great information in that master plan they really want to rely on for constructing those parks and putting those elements into those parks too. So I don't see the partnership going away after we're done with this process.
Yeah. And the other part would be, of course, with City Green, and, it's been touted as having civic use opportunities. I'd like to make sure that the city and parks would have some influence over that, to make sure it's working for certainly the CITYWALK residents, but the community at large as well. So that would be of concern to me. I agree with my colleagues that the timing of the Woodlot and Henry Ranch projects is concerning to me. And so I certainly share that. And I feel like this is on its way to being something viable, but I do feel that there are some concerns, and I'm not sure that the credit that we're giving for the parkway and the lake acreage is sufficient. So, or is proper. So anyway, those are just some thoughts of mine. Thank you.
So Commissioner Lopez, Lucy, you want to speak? Or I don't see your hands up, so I just want to make sure.
Carol, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Forget that all the time. Like I said, I don't want to go into detail of every, that what's been said, but I have to agree that I don't believe that we're getting the money up front that we need, and Commissioner Beerbaum went through that. And I definitely think that being the woodlot has been there for ages. 935th building permit, I just think is way late. And the Henry Ranch also. I think we need more money up front, and I think we need to move these issues up, because this this development goes through 25, 27 years. So, when are we going to get to see these, when it does actually come, and what years? Because these people will be moving in, and like we said, we'll have more impact on our parks. And I agree that the Sunset Development owns the lakes and the park area and the parkways. And so I think that they should not receive credit for that, because that's owned their property. So I think it should be refigured that we need to get more money up front, so that we are making sure that we're taking care of our parks and the people who live here. And my concern in the small park area that they have, I don't think they don't fit our needs of our community, because they're very small. And like we say, that no less than 2 acres. So those are not really going to be beneficial to the entire community. So I have to agree with my commissioners that this needs to be rethought a little bit better, and that we need a little bit more credit, I do believe. I think that Sunset does great jobs, but I think that we're not getting quite our share. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I might, I just want to, there's been a couple of comments made regarding the parkways. So we are going to be undertaking the walking district. We have design workshop is under contract, and Brad and Lauren have been working to fine tune the scope of work. So that's going to be coming forward. And so the walking district is going to be more than just a sidewalk. It's going to be amenity filled. So that really, and some of it will be on Sunset's property. It will have to be with the 60-foot wide parkway. So that'll be on Sunset's property. And so for us we want to make sure, and that's going to be publicly accessible. So you're going to have a walking district that is a city council goal. And we're going to be asking Sunset basically to implement a majority of that walking district through this project. So, there is some merit for the parkways having credit, because they are not just the 6-foot sidewalk you see on Camino Ramon right now. They're going to be something much, much more down the road.
Thank you. Student Commissioner Amrita Ramesh, you want any comments?
I agree with what was said before about how we need more parks on our west side. I actually did have a question before, but I think Commissioner Kennison Lee asked the same thing about programming at the parks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks all commissioners for your excellent feedback, and it's a thorough analysis. That's always, I feel great about our whole commission, because we do all this research before we get to the meeting, and fantastic. It's a very good feedback and information that we receive on this call. So I have one quick question for either Debbie or Kathy. Do we have any development in the past where like developer owns and then develop and maintain something like this in the past? I'm just trying to see if we have any example.
Not to my knowledge. Kathy, do you know?
Sorry, covered my mute button. No, we don't have anybody that's done a maintenance agreement to my knowledge before. So this is the first.
Thank you. So great. This is a very good challenge there. So coming back to this, whatever Commissioner Birnbaum mentioned, as well as other commissioners, Keniston Lee and Dalrick and Commissioner Lopez Lucy mentioned, like one thing is here when we are saying for the Parkway 10.5 acres for walking district, right? So that's definitely, it doesn't even match with what our parks definition. But now I just heard from Debbie that if we do have that as part of our walking districts, that's why those roads are like, or the parkway or pathways will be much wider than the regular ones. So that can add some merit to it. And but then it still doesn't really match with the very definition of the city parks. And then comes to the acre, like 22.5 acres in lakes. So again, these lakes are already there, and one question there was from, I think, Commissioner Keniston Lee, whether we can conduct the programs in that lakes as a city programs. I didn't hear the answer on that one. Is it like, can we conduct the programs from the city parks and community services side in these lakes?
I'll jump in. I think it really comes down to Jerry probably to answer that somewhat, but we've enjoyed an amazingly wonderful relationship with Sunset over time and have worked jointly on many programs, including the lights on the holiday. On the holidays, we've worked together on different tree lighting elements over the years. So really, like I said, it would be Sunset's, it's their lake, but I would conceive that we would be able to do probably some programming there if they were open to it.
Okay, can we get feedback from Jerry on that one, or that's?
Yeah, Jerry's on.
Yeah, it probably would be appropriate for me to hear the rest of your comments, Chair, and then I can kind of address that question and a couple of others that came up, I think, and some misunderstandings about some things that I should clear up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jerry. Okay, cool. And another thing is, like, in this case, pretty much all the parks are owned by Sunset, and none of those parks are going to be owned by parks. And I understood that we can use, like, at least on the park side and walking district, we could use some of them, like for our city community parks and like parks and community services programs. So, but then once again, going back, that these parks are still not owned by city, still owned by Sunset Development. So again, we missed the definition there. So after looking at all these different aspects and with the current, whatever the current guidelines that we are following, I would say that on the credit side, I pretty much agree with Commissioner Birnbaum that like the credits for the development, whatever the development for city greens for civic uses, and maybe part of the walking district that could be added as part of the credits, that I can see that as option. And then about the payments, like definitely we cannot wait for like 935 because the master plan update is in place, and one of the key objective for the funding was from the CITYWALK, and here waiting, as we don't even know the timeline at this point. So that will be definitely a concern. So we need to definitely look at acceleration of payment. And on top of it, like the open space, that one looks pretty good for me, like 50% ahead. And then after 50%, like after like whatever the division, and then there is no credits on that one. It is straightforward. So that for open space fee, that looks perfect for me. So maybe we should look at a similar approach for the parks fee also. That's my recommendation. I see Commissioner Birnbaum, you raise your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Burrows. I want to make it clear that I think Sunset is a quality partner, and they have been with us for many years, and everything that they do is top notch. Okay, so my comments about paying and fees and that is not a slight at all against Sunset. This is a business deal, folks. Okay, this is an agreement that has already been signed and sealed. The agreement is they owe us $49 million and $3.4 million in open space fees. Everything we're negotiating here is a credit back to them against what they've already agreed to. Now, I'm open, Debbie, to reconsider a discussion about the parkways and walkways once I see what it is. And maybe that is, we look at that as the same way that we look at City Green, is that we look at it as a credit for the construction costs. But we need to really think seriously about walking away from that money. This is the funding source for the city, master plan for the next 20 plus years. And if we give that away, then we have to find another way of doing it, or we don't do those projects. So, I feel, the current proposal is not acceptable. Now, a revised proposal might come back with things that I might change my mind, but I think that the proposal that's been put forward to this commission to comment on and then probably take forward to the planning commission is not an acceptable proposal.
Commissioner Lee?
Make sure I'm not muted. Yeah, I mean, to Commissioner Birnbaum's point, I think we all recognize that the opportunity to secure these credits, to secure funding for the master plan, it doesn't come around every day. I mean, it's pretty rare. And, at the risk of seemingly patting this body on its back, you can tell by the comments that everybody takes this very seriously, that they see this as a unique and rare opportunity, that obviously it's got to work for Sunset, but it also has to work for our city and all of our residents. It has to be a good decision. So that's certainly clear. I was going to ask Debbie, because you mentioned the walking district and how the parkway is sort of going to blend into that project. Does that mean that there will be, or needs to be, some negotiation of how that fits in with the walking district, and to make sure that Sunset would fund the same amenities as we would see in other parts of the walking district? How does that work? And is that something we need to negotiate on the front end as part of this process?
Well, the walking district's not designed yet, but
Right.
If you look at Sunset's proposal or the CITYWALK plan itself, it really, the walking district really was, it's been discussed for many years, but Sunset really, in my mind, took a look at that and the idea of it and really incorporate into their project from day one. And so there are certain amenities that will need to be included as part of the walking district that will come out of that plan that we can continue to work with Sunset on as part of the construction of the walking district along the commuter Ramon frontage.
Okay. That's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, so once again, as I definitely agree with all our commissioners that we do agree Sunset is definitely a great partner for our city, and the quality of work that is done in past, and we all appreciate that. And for sure, we agree that it is going to be a great quality for whatever the future also, because based on whatever is done in, right? So there is no question about it, but this call is specifically to make sure that we are talking about the credits on the parks and open space. With that, okay, Jerry, you want to go ahead and answer any questions?
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you for all the comments. I appreciate the feedback and understand where you're coming from. I'd like to give you a little bit from us. First, I want to clear up a couple things. One is that we haven't owned the lakes for years and have not marketed them for our office buildings for years, because we just bought that building about 5 or 6 years ago. That lake was walled off to the entire community. Most people didn't even know there were lakes there until we opened them up and did some enhancement to them and opened them up to the public for walking their dogs around and things like that. The intent here is to, around the lakes, is to invest significantly more money to make them far more accessible to the public, to also increase the amenities. We're talking about adding a boat dock for sailing boats. We have already Duffy's and rowboats. And so we're talking about making it an active lake that you can get on and participate on and teach kids how to sail and fish and all of those things, which is a huge amenity to not just Bishop Ranch, but to the entire community, which they would not have the opportunity to have. We're also talking about doing a community center on the south end of the lake, where there'll be another dock where they can have food and eat on the dock and enjoy the water from that perspective. So I think that, just because the lakes are existing, to say they're not of any value and to give no value seems a little unfair to us. Around the pocket parks, to give no credit, the one thing that your current code doesn't really consider is this is a new project that's not been done before in this city. While the general plan has been pushing for this to include this housing in the core, by its nature does not work like single family housing does in the rest of your city. And your parks rules currently deal as if you're a suburban single family city. And so it may be worthy re-looking at what these park requirements are if you're going to encourage infill development, because we could have taken the approach that we'll just pay you the money and build no parks. But as you know, we're a partner with the city, and we think the city is a great partner with us, and we wanted to build a great community. And these pocket parks for this development, they are going to be not just for Sunset, these are for your residents. We're building this infill development. Yes, it's a business opportunity for us, but it's also a win-win for the city in creating the housing that's much needed in an area that has less impact than anywhere else in your city. And you want to build quality neighborhoods. That's what Sunset's known for. And so by us just paying a fee and not building parks would create an awful development. And that's not one we want to do. But then now we shouldn't really be penalized for building these parks. And maybe they're not all 2 acres because of your current standard, but they still have quite a bit of value to the residents. And and I think 48% credit is really pretty fair. We're investing a significant amount. We have a lot of open space around this development, which will make your downtown and these neighborhoods for downtown quite special. As it relates to the Parkway, as Debbie mentioned, we did take into consideration the upcoming walking district, although it hasn't been designed and it's not really fully vetted and all of that. We thought it was a really important and valid issue. And we created these very large parkways, which really weren't needed. I mean, 60 feet is big. And we plan on making these amenity-rich walkways lined with trees and having benches and other amenities, and would be very valuable as part of the walking district, which, wasn't needed. We could have done a normal, there are no setback requirements, by the way, in this district. There wouldn't even need to be setbacks. There could have just be sidewalk and a curb and a little bit of planting. So we've given up a lot of valuable land and a lot of valuable density in order to create a really special place and create this balance of the needed housing and the needed low income and workforce housing, but also creating a really beautiful place that fits within Bishop Ranch and something that San Ramon can be proud of. And, of course, we have a huge respect for this commission and would obviously, like we have with every project we've done and worked alongside this city for 40 years, would look to your guidance and your knowledge of what residents want and what they need in their parks. And the intent of these pocket parks would be to serve these residents, but not only this to serve the residents, which would be your residents in this development, not Sunset Development residents only, but to the broader community. Because if you remember the renderings and you remember the feel of these streets, not just the perimeter parkway, which would be beautiful in itself, but the streets themselves will be active with the way that's developed, and they will be beautiful. And people will walk this area, not just around the perimeter. They'll walk through the neighborhoods and discover these parks and rest and they're walking their kids or their dogs, and they'll stop and use the swing sets and use the other amenities that are there and sit in the bench and relax and take in the beauty. And so these parks will not just serve the local residents, they will serve the broader community. And so, I feel like, we have, I respectfully disagree with some of the positions that we should get no value just because we own them today, or we're building them and we'll use them to market, because we're building a community that's not just for us, but it's for the city of San Ramon. And so I think there should be value there that should be recognized. And as I mentioned, we will obviously work with design, and we'll work with the idea of programming around those lakes. But we've always worked and been a great partner with the city. And as Debbie mentioned, these were going to be publicly accessible in perpetuity, where there's no horizon on these parks. And I think it should be also noted, by the way, that taking on the maintenance, we could dedicate all these parks and we could dedicate the parkway, and there would be value for that we would get. And you would have to maintain that, which would be a huge burden on the city, on the parks budget. And we're taking that off. And I think the other thing that needs to be recognized here around these parks is you're trying to make this 6.0, what the park requirements in your master plan, and there's a shortage of land. And you're competing with residential and all of this thing. And this goes to help meet that. Of not giving credit for the parks that are being built goes in the face of trying to meet the park demand for the community. So I think that answers all of the question and brings a couple of points forward that I wanted to make. But I understand where you're coming from, and I respect your opinion and your position on these parks. But hopefully we can find and strike a balance that will be fair to both parties.
Commissioner Dahlrick.
Thank you. I was going to say something before, Jerry, but Jerry, thanks very much. And I just want to make some comments on some of the things that I heard, not just in Jerry's comments, but before. And there was mention that this is a business opportunity, and Sunset's going to make, money on it. And last time I checked, we were still a capitalist society, and we encourage capital improvement, we encourage capital investment and risk. And this is what's going on here right now, but it's to the benefit of the city. So number two, I wanted to reiterate also, and Jerry, you mentioned this, you have to reset your expectations. This is not as Jerry mentioned, a suburban development. So I sit on the Smart Growth Advisory Board for the National Association of Realtors. And we actually have budget that we provide for cities that come to us looking for funding for pocket parks, small areas within an urban environment that if you take that particular area and you create an environment that people can either meet at, or it joins together two different neighborhoods that perhaps have not been joined together, or two retail areas. It could be very simple. It could be an acre or two, or even less. It could be an alleyway that we have funded before to bring together residents and to create an environment that's appropriate for the area. So I say 100%, these pocket parks are appropriate for this area. I don't think we're going to have people going from, Windermere down to these pocket parks unless they're at the city center and they want to stroll around. So we have to reset our expectations on what a park is, because there are different mediums, there's different expectations, there's different sizes that accommodate the particular neighborhoods. Not all of our parks are the same size, and we need to take a look at that. I have to agree with the Lakes. They weren't open before. There's been a great partnership with the Roundhouse Theater Conference Center as well. And as well, I don't think there should be any question about programming together because there's been great programming together. We just look at the city festivals with the lights and other areas. So we see that there's always been cooperation. So I have no concerns about any kind of programming on any of the facilities in the park areas that are available. And Kathy, I just want to get one clarification. I kept hearing repeatedly saying that we're looking for these impact fees to basically fund the master plan for the next, 20 years. I know that there's going to be some of these that will go in, but I remember other sources of funding and allocation of other sources of funding for those programs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been prioritizing them. If we were just expecting $50 million to come in, we'd do everything right away. But in fact, at our last meeting, one of the questions was, what do you want to prioritize based upon the budget and the funding? So could I get a clarification on that? Are we looking for these impact fees to fund all the park master plan for the next 20 years? Or is this part of a normal development project and we get a portion of those fees that come in for park expansion, park improvement, amenity improvement, etc. I'll take my answer off the air.
Kathy, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Kathy, you want to jump in?
No, go ahead. I was going to respond, but I think.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I had another point.
All I'm going to say is, yes, as you all know, the master plan has a chapter at the back on funding. So we utilize several different funding sources, grants, Proposition 68, all kinds of different things to fund different things throughout the course of the master plan. This is one development that has fees. There'll be other developments that also have fees.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to jump in and, as I mentioned in the presentation, Sunset's requirement is just to pay fees, but there's a net new population being added to the city. So there's currently already about 1,687 units programmed for CITYWALK in the city, in the Bishop Branch core. This project added another 2,800 or so, which is why so the population is not the 9,000, it's much less, because we're only calculating the new park need based on the net new population that's being generated in the project area. So the 49, if they don't, if they would fee out, that money, yes, would go to the master plan implementation, but we also are going to have to find and construct 38 acres of parkland in the city to maintain our 6.5 acres per 1,000. And as Commissioner Dorlick pointed out, all cities are in the middle of their regional housing needs allocation, and our allocation is significantly high. It is almost 5,000 units, as I shared with the council last night. So we not only have to plan for housing sites to meet our state requirements, because without a certified housing element, we can't apply for grants. So, and which could affect some of the park grants that Kathy may want to apply for. So it's kind of it's a holistic approach to looking at this. And so while we're trying to plan for housing now, we also have to be planning for additional parkland. And the city is very scarce on available land, especially 38 acres, unless you're buying a piece of property and demoing an office building potentially, which does have a cost to that too. So that's just something really to keep in mind. How we approach this was looking at the benefit to the city, that we're going to be able to take credit for the 40 acres of parks they're actually providing, that helps meet our general plan standard at build out. And the residents, these are new residents to the city, and the parks will benefit the new residents, the existing residents, much like the parks in Doherty Valley and South San Ramon benefit those residents, and anyone can go to them. But primarily the residents who live in that area will go to those parks because they're in their neighborhood. If they come down to CITYWALK, then yes, they'll go to City Green and maybe use some of the other parks, but your first destination is going to be your park across the street if it's there. Or if you do a park tour and want to, try out the new parks in the city. When I was a young mom, I would go to all different parks, just something new with my kids. So, but I just want to kind of put that out there, is that, some of the funding will go to the Parks Master Plan, but we still would have a deficit that we're going to have to make up for somewhere along the road, or we're going to have to change the standard from 6.5 per 1,000 to something less. And so, and that's a whole nother policy discussion that we would need to have down the road, if that's, depending on how we approach this. So I just wanted to kind of have those additional comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Commissioner Kinnison-Lee.
Yes, let me make sure I'm off. Okay, good. I wanted to say a couple of things. Number one, to Jerry, I'm somewhat reassured by the fact that Sunset doesn't seem to do things halfway. And the example that comes to mind is the staircase that I'm sure Joe goes up and down every day in City Hall, that you guys could have done it cheaper, right? But you, as I recall, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys took pride in the facility and you wanted to do it right. And so that, is somewhat reassuring that you guys have that perspective. And I would hope that, and would think that would be carried through with this project. So that's a good thing. And also I did want to validate what you said about maintenance. And I had meant to say that previously, that is not lost on me. The fact that you're making parks public and facilities public, that you are assuming or maintaining maintenance responsibility for. So that is costly. We are a city full of parks that are getting older every day, and we know that maintenance costs are, expensive. So that point certainly was not lost on me as well. You know, to Commissioner Dorlick's point about this being a new development for San Ramon and being more urban or downtown in style, and that we have to embrace that somewhat. I understand that point. My goal and my reason for wanting to really have this be a collaborative approach is we can't have it be disjointed from our general identity. And I think that we can have it be unique and appropriate for the space, but at the same time, I think there's something about, you know, we're in parks, we're all about unifying our city and creating community. And this is one of those rare opportunities where we have a new development that we're excited about, but we need to make sure that it promotes unity, promotes inclusion, and promotes community. So that's really important. The real issue, the remaining issues for me are, because, you know, in my mind, you should get some credit for parkways. You should get some credit for the lakes. I'm really excited to hear you talk about a plan to invest additional money into the lake areas, into programming of them and amenities for the lake areas. That's great. I'm really excited about that. So the question I'm feeling from a lot of my fellow commissioners here is, how much credit should you guys get for that, right? And you know, you mentioned sort of duration of ownership and so forth. And so I think that remains the big issue. I mean, we're talking, you know, credit for 22.5 acres of lakes. That's a huge chunk of change, huge chunk of money. And then also 10.5 acres in the parkway. That's relative to the overall amounts is huge. It's a huge chunk. There's a lot of value there. I don't want to take that from you, but I think the question I'd like for us to come up with is, are we looking at reducing that and wanting money for the remainder, you know, or, you know, where does everybody fall on that? And also the common theme I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners is escalating, you know, being concerned about the building of Woodlot and Henry Ranch. And what I'm hearing from most folks here, if not all, is that there should be some kind of escalation. So I feel like there needs to be, as you said, a rebalancing a bit, that where we come up with something that works for both sides of it. I think we're getting there, but we're not quite there.
If I can just address, I understand where you're coming from, right? And I agree. When you look at the acres in and itself of the 22 acres for the lake or the 11 acres for the parkway, remember, we're only getting credit for 48%. So it's not like you're getting us credit for 100%. We're investing 100% of the money, by the way, to make them and to maintain them. And the cost of maintenance isn't even accounted for in this equation. And so I think, you know, we recognize beyond just creating amenities for Bishop Ranch and the residents that will come to Bishop Ranch as part of this development, we needed to embrace the broader community. And, you know, City Green was going to that point, and also building 3 offsite parks that aren't part of our development or anywhere near our development. And so, you know, I think we're trying to find and strike that balance. And, you know, maybe there's some issues around timing, and we'll have to look at all of that. But I think, you know, we're not asking for 100% credit. And I think we're investing 100% of the money, but only asking for 48% of the credit. So I want to make sure that was clear.
And through the chair, if I might, I want to echo what Jerry said. When we looked at the park credit, we didn't go to, you know, a certain credit for each park, right? We look at it in the totality of the 40 acres they were proposing, trying to find a number that we felt was a good compromise, because it's not like, you know, this is not 50%. We didn't feel that would be appropriate. And we knew that 75 or 80% would not be acceptable. And so that's why we kind of settled on that 48%, because it's not, you know, it's less than half. And we thought that was a good compromise, but we didn't go say, counted all the lakes and all the parkways and nothing else. We just looked at the totality of the parks and where they are, or the totality of the parks basically, and then found a percentage that we thought would be beneficial based on all the other components of the deal. And also recognizing, you know, we have $49.3 million to play with basically, and that's their total obligation. And they're actually getting $2.3 million more than their total obligation.
Thank you. Commissioner Birnbaum.
I wanted to respond to a couple of things. Commissioner Dorlich talked about that, you know, I made reference to the CITYWALK being the sole source of funding. I did make that comment. it is the primary source of funding going forward. And having been on the commission long enough to look at where we get our funding from various developments, this is the largest single funding source that we will be looking at in the near future. Okay, there's no other developments that's going to come in that's going to have that kind of influence on the parks budget. The second thing I wanted to respond to is, you know, this whole theory about we need 6.5 acres of land. This is something that we've talked about as a commission, that we need to take a look at how we've developed that. And we've said that open space right now receives absolutely zero credit towards that goal. And I think, you know, hanging that goal over our head and saying that that's going to drive our decisions as it relates to, you know, this specific project, I think is not appropriate. We know that we have lots of open space around us, and we know that it is valued highly by the public, and we need to address that issue. And that is a separate issue that the Parks Commission, the Planning Commission, and the City Council needs to take on. So using that as a, you know, reason why we should do something as it relates to this project, I don't buy, okay? I buy, you know, I hear some of the comments that have been made today by my fellow commissioners. I believe what we need to do is reject this proposal and ask that you guys go back and rework it. And maybe you'll come back with something that is much more acceptable. You've heard our comments, okay? You know, we don't make, this commission isn't going to make the decision. All we're doing is providing comments, and it's going to go on to the Planning Commission, okay? So I don't know whether we need to do anything specific, but what you've put in front of us today sounds like it doesn't work for the bulk of the commissioners. So therefore, you need to go back and rework it. And I don't know whether we're going to get another chance to look at it, or you guys are going to just take it to the Planning Commission. Eventually, this is going to end up in the city, you know, City Council's lap. And I assume that there is a strong driving force to get this done sooner than later.
Thank you. So I do see like a couple more hands raised. So before that, I just want to make sure that it's great that a lot of information is being shared about RENA and all that, about development. See, there is no question about the quality or the deliverables from the Sunset Development and about our partnership with Sunset Development. There is no questions about that. And also how this project is going to help on the housing side and all that. But let's try to focus on, in this call, let's focus on the credits of the parks. So that will be great, commissioners. So with that, Commissioner Dolrick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have to respectfully disagree that we send the entire proposal back for. I think there's a few areas that need some addressing. I mean, it's already gone through the City Council and the Planning Commission, and it's going to go back to them with our comments specifically about the parks, not necessarily about the credits. So if I can get a clarification on the timeline for the park credit and fee proposals on the Woodlot, Henry Ranch, and the turf. I mean, we're saying 935th building permit, 1900th building permit, 1460th building permit. What time are we talking about here? What's our time to these benchmarks? Do we have an estimate? Is it, 935 permit issued in 2 years, or is it going to be 10 years? So that's one question. But I find most of the rest of the proposals to be pretty consistent with how we've dealt with other similar proposals. So, I mean, if I can get some clarification on that, I mean, I think there's a few areas that might need to be adjusted, but overall, I see it as a fair and equitable way to move forward on this project with the immense benefits that come to San Ramon. So do we have any timeline, or instead of a permit number, can we look at a time, a specific date or interim for those initiation of funding for those parks?
I'll let Jerry respond to the years based on what their phasing plan is. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Mhm.
It's easier to tie construction of a facility or an improvement to a building permit, because a building permit is a hard stop. And if there are changes in economic times, a recession or or something else where growth tends to slow, the funds won't be there to construct the parks.
No, understood. But I mean,
Permit.
the way that the plan is in place now, I mean, there must be some timeline for 935th, because a number was picked. It's not 910, it's not 750, it's 935th. So there must have been some reason to pick that particular number. And it's usually because of some sort of a benchmark or metric in the building process, or a number of units that have been constructed and potentially rented, since I think the majority of them are going to be, rental units. So there's an expectation of revenue that is accrued with a particular, timeline with a building permit. So just, I mean, all things staying the same, which is a very bad assumption to make. What was the decision criteria and the decision process for those particular numbers? And was there a timeline or another benchmark that we could look at that might be a little bit more, concrete? No
Well,
pun intended.
let me give you some background around timing. I mean, it's difficult to put timing in years because there's a lot of things that could take effect, like a pandemic, for instance, which nobody anticipated. There could be a huge recession. There's a lot of things that could impact timing of all of this. If you were to straight line it, and assuming we started to day one and built them, and you said, how long is it going to take to build 4,500 units in 25 years? It's 180 units a year. Now, that's not exactly how it's going to get built, because what is going to happen is we're going to build a building, of whatever the building size is on that particular module. Could be 250 units. It could be 400 units. And you'll build those buildings, call it, let's just say 300 units at a time. And it takes 2 years to build them, about a year to get it leased. And if you build them back to back, you'd be building roughly 300 units every 2 years. And so that's kind of how it might fold. Now, there's also, we could partner with other people and they could be building the same time we could be building, so it could get accelerated. There's a lot of ways it could go. So there's no way to predict. However, the methodology that we used, the reason why we used certain unit count was based on what we felt the impact and the demand of the population base would be. So, if we go, and to build these developments is not an insignificant investment. And as you know, in the Bay Area, the impact fees are enormous. And so it's not like we're going to be rolling in millions of dollars of profit day one. These are, very expensive developments to build, and takes an intensive amount of capital. It takes a while to get the cash flow. You're running negative for a long time until you get cash flow. So it's difficult to put a burden on top of all the impact and permit fees that are in this jurisdiction. And then, several millions of dollars of park fees, let's say, if they were trying to be too accelerated, would be a financial burden that would be intolerable. And so we're trying to do it with balance it with getting revenue into where we can afford to fund, as well as when's the actual impact going to be. At 200 units, how many kids are going to be in those first 200 units? We don't know. But if you're talking about 2.1 people per unit, you got 600 units, you're at 300 units, you've got 600 people.
Well, and I understand.
How much burden on the parks is that going to cause right away? So we were trying to time it with that kind of thought and process.
Well, and I understand building permits being issued does not equal construction starting. I mean, there is a time lag between the permit being issued and the actual construction, start.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, just to get some sort of a, idea, is it, 2033 or is it, 2024? just along those lines, Jerry, to get some measure on how to, prioritize that. And then perhaps, those 3 projects, maybe we should prioritize them. Is the synthetic turf more important than getting the woodlot built, which is, not really walkable. I mean, the woodlot is not really, except for that immediate neighborhood, it's, not a really walkable park. Henry Ranch, I would consider to be more walkable because it's going to be actually in that neighborhood. So there might be a reprioritization of which is done first. But yeah, just to kind of get an idea about, are we looking at 10 years or are we looking at the 20-year mark? And maybe reprioritize them. That could be something that we could discuss too, is, which are more important, and also from a cost perspective and from a resident's perspective, which one's going to be used more? Is the woodlot used more, or Henry Ranch, or is that synthetic turf, necessary and on the schedule to get replacement? And this would relieve, some budgetary issues immediately for the Iron Horse, which is a very, heavily used field. So that could be a way to look at it too. Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez-Lucy, please.
Well, it's interesting. That was basically my same question as what Commissioner Will had, because I wanted to know if there was a sort of a timeline. And then Jerry, you've explained it very well of the permitting and how long it takes and everything. And so that was my basic question. So you've answered all my questions that I had from the same questions I had as the Commissioner Will. So thank you.
Okay, I see City Manager Joe Gordon. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And this was an excellent conversation, excellent discussion. The diversity of thought and ideas helps us. I'd like to just point out once again, to help give this clarity to the process, it's not these negotiations have taken days and days and days and weeks and days and more days. And so it's been a collaborative and thought out process. And the addition of your suggestions are very helpful. I think Commissioner Kennison Lee brought up a great point that in the light of these discussions and negotiations, I would take you back to the first few slides. Those are our directions in negotiations. They were informed by the City Council goals, which this checks every box. They were informed by the general and specific plans, and they were informed by the Parks Master Plan. So I appreciate all the input, but we have to negotiate and have those discussions in the light of those, because those are basically staff's marching orders in how to proceed, and that's how this original document came into being. And I would also like to remind everybody that City Hall was built in a manner that maximized the Sunset Development's capabilities because of their construction capabilities, and was able to build our City Hall at no cost to us, yet it would have been a significant higher cost if we were to do it ourselves. And so when you look at that, I think you have to also, as why we considered this additional benefit that hasn't been necessarily addressed as much, and that if we are required to build these parks, then we will be required to spend a whole lot more money building them. So it's in the light of those significant factors that this development agreement came into being, and I appreciate each and everybody's thoughtful comments and suggestions. And so just to clarify, I'm hearing if there's timeline, if we can move timeline, look at that, review that. I'm hearing that. I'm hearing there's questions of park credit, and it's back to, is that the most appropriate or reasonable park credit? Is there anything else that we missed when it comes to like the park? the walking district, if the walking district was created at the council level and as a council goal, and I might add that Sunset actually prior to even CITYWALK coming, even being proposed or really thought of several years ago, Alex Jr. Opened the doors to 2600 to allow some of that to take place and was fully behind this walking district. So the amenity piece of that, and they considered this 60-foot parkway path to see the walking district come to being, which is the council goal. And then I might add back, if you remember the joint meeting between the, I believe it was the council and the commission, there was a diversity of thought there, if you remember, even back then, that there were different ideas and different thoughts on it. But one thing was the city green was not even contemplated at the time, and Sunset picked up that concept at that time and actually worked that into later on into the development agreement, or not the development agreements, but actually into the design, just hearing the feedback. So they've received the feedback. And so if we could get anything specific that we can identify, other than I'm hearing park credits and I'm hearing timeline of the other parks coming online, if there's additional points that are really clarified in the light of how we are negotiating, I'd love to get that clarified, because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And the reason I'm speaking is I'm part of this negotiation with Debbie, and so I want to hear and make sure I'm not missing anything.
Commissioner Bonbon?
You know, I wouldn't let you off the hook after you saying that you're looking for feedback. One comment that I would make is, you know, the fact that we've identified the Woodlot and Henry Ranch and the Iron Horse, you know, turf field as priorities. I look at that and say, isn't that the responsibility of the Parks Commission to figure out which projects should go first? I look at this and I say, you know, are we being locked in by this agreement to do those fields and those projects above everything else? Or should we be looking at, you know, a bucket of money that is given to, you know, the city, and then the Parks Commission comes forward with recommendations based on priorities? Now, I don't disagree about the Woodlot. I've lived, you know, 2 blocks away from the Woodlot for 35 years, and I haven't been able to use that for 35 years. So I have a bias for that. But the fact that in this presentation, there are specifically mentioned projects, does that mean that if the city decides to do a different project, then that $8.8 million is not available? And I just, you know, I look at that, and or whatever the dollar amount is, but I look at that as are we negotiating ourselves into a situation that takes the flexibility that the city should have as it relates to the funding? Now, the $6.1 million that was mentioned in this agreement is unrestricted, if I understand it correctly. Why shouldn't the total $15 million be unrestricted, and then let the Parks Commission and city determine the priorities?
That's a great point and a great question, and I will just tell you the thought process behind that. And that during my time as city manager, both communicated by Parks as well as the council, what important priorities were the Woodlot and Henry Ranch in the realm of the Parks strategy, if you will. There was a desire, as well as a desire to a stated desire to put parks in what is currently deemed underparked areas of the city, which is there on the west end. And so with that in mind, that's how those parks came into being. The second answer, and again, this is just the negotiation piece of it. The second answer was it may be $8 million that we get in the pot, but it may cost the city $12 million to build. And so we maximize that dollar just like we did with City Hall, because Sunset can do it at a more economical price because they're a development, or they're a construction company, right? And just like the discussion with City Hall was that they could do it at a better value. And so we're trying to maximize the dollar there. And that was the only reason that those two parks were primarily placed in there.
But Joe, that was not presented in the presentation. There was no mention at all that Sunset's going to build these parks.
Yeah,
It is in the presentation. That's part of the agreement.
I didn't see it mentioned at all in the presentation. They say the money is mentioned there, but it's not stated that they are going to be the ones that are going to construct the parks. And it states in there that the development, the design fees and all permitting fees are that the city's on the hook for.
The development agreement is negotiated. Sunset is constructing the parks.
Where does that say that, Debbie?
The last page of the staff report, where it begins with the agreements as negotiated by city staff and agreed to by Sunset, would provide in conjunction with the development of CITYWALK the following. And the third bullet point is construction of the following offsite parks with the timing associated with those.
So if I can just add to, we're open to whatever the city council or planning commission or the parks commission wants to do from a priority. That's fine with us. It's just, we're trying to get our arms around the cost. I think that the intent for us, I think by capping it on the construction costs, it gives you more value to build the park and get more amenities. If you end up putting design and permit fees in there, you're going to have less to build the park with.
All right, I missed that. Thank you for pointing that out.
okay. Commissioner Kenston-Lee?
Okay, this is my summary. This is the last time I want to speak, but I do hope that Sunset takes all of this feedback in the spirit in which it's offered, and that you can tell we're very passionate about parks in the city of San Ramon, and I think we also value our partnership with you. And so I just want to make sure, I think it's obvious, but I felt I needed to restate that. So I'm sure you'll go back with that, holding that in that spirit. I validate what Don's saying, that, our charter is to recommend the direction funds in parks and community services. And so you would hope you would have a good source of discretionary funds to do your job. So I get what he's saying. However, much of me feels that the city staff have done due diligence to try and adhere the projects with the general plan and the parks master plan. So I think there's some due diligence that's been done there. And so I think it's reasonable to want to, given the track record of Sunset, to leverage that relationship to save costs and get a good product in an efficient and cost-effective way. I think that's valid. So to answer Joe's question about, sort of summarizing what you're hearing, and I can't speak for my fellow commissioners, but I can summarize what I'm hearing, and what we've seen really is a good spectrum of perspective, right? But I think if you guys were to go back to negotiations, and I think if we were to provide some guidance to the negotiators and to city council, I think we're talking about three things, really. I think we're talking about considering pushing back those credits and perhaps I'm just speaking for myself, pushing back credits a bit. I get the 48%, but pushing that back a bit, wherever that comfort level, that real pain threshold is on the lakes. And less important to me personally would be the Parkway. I'm kind of intrigued by that whole concept of tying it in with the walking district, but pushing back those credits a bit, perhaps. Also the west side park development, accelerating that process a bit, which I think, Jerry, you heard that clearly, that we'd like for you to look at that. And then as a third, and in order of prioritization, I understand what you're saying about, having to devote funds to permits and design takes away from funds of building the parks. However, that would be another potential give on your part, is to see if there would be any opportunity to share in those costs, because, they can be considerable. So those would be, I think, 3 takeaways, Joe, to bring back to the table and see, because ultimately we are advisors, right? We're not, as somebody mentioned, maybe it was Commissioner Dorlick, we are not making that decision. We understand that there are a lot of forces at work here and a lot of consensus building that needs to take place. But I think those are 3 areas that could potentially satisfy some of the concerns that I've heard from most folks tonight.
Sounds good. I don't see any more hands on this. So as Commissioner Kinston Lee summarized excellently about our viewpoints, one thing I definitely liked about is Jerry mentioning about strike the balance. So here I understand that you're coming with 48%, but then the other side of the commission thinks that, hey, how about most of these amenities that are being provided as part of the building, right, for the housing purpose? So that's where we need to really strike the balance and see where we can. I'm sure we have one of the fantastic staff, so they're pretty good about negotiating and handling this. Oh, I see Commissioner Dolrick raising his hand. Commissioner Dolrick, please go ahead.
I just want to go on record. I'm fine with the credits the way they are. The explanation was great. They seem to be well earned, so I'm fine with that. Except, see what we can do with the parks on the side. Those are my concerns. And Joe, I appreciate your input and thank you for the background.
Unfortunately, it looks to me as like Shadar might have gotten frozen here. Wouldn't be as good call without a freeze.
So Kathy, I have a basic question. The way I read the action item for us is to provide the input, and you've definitely gotten input today. Okay. The next step, can somebody take me through what the next steps in this process is, and what roughly is the timeline for this to get finally resolved?
That is actually going to be more of a Debbie question, I think, at this point, because the feedback is going to go to the Planning Commission, and then Debbie, at what happens after that point.
So we'll provide your feedback to the Planning Commission. We're tentatively scheduled for October 6th, or our schedule for October 6th, actually. And then once the commission finalizes the recommendation, it will then go up to the City Council for their consideration. So the City Council has the final say, and they will be the executors of the agreement.
So the Planning Commission will get to see either what we've just seen or some other iteration of this, and they will have the opportunity to debate and discuss that, and they will come to some final resolution that then will be taken to the City Council. Is that correct?
Right. So what we'll be presenting to the Planning Commission is the agreement as currently written. The staff report will include a summary of this meeting and the feedback that we did receive. At that point, the commission will then, discuss not only this part of the development agreement, but there's other aspects to the development agreement also. This isn't the only benefit the city is receiving. There's a number of things that we are getting out of this development agreement. And so they will then finalize their recommendation, and then they will forward that to the City Council.
So what I'm hearing is our comments will only be footnoted, and there will be no modifications to what was presented today to the Planning Commission.
We will take your feedback to the commission. The commission may direct us to make modifications to the parks credit, and Joe and I will be working with Jerry to kind of review your comments and see where we can make some adjustments in the park credit proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we can adjourn the call. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you